She came down the main street of Hardin Creek with her baby on her hip and her trunk on her back, and the May sun already working on the day, and the town watched her the way small towns watch a thing they have already decided about. She had heard the first comment before she reached the dry goods store. A woman's voice, not lowered. "Lord, look at that." The second came from the porch of the barber shop. A man this time, lower, meant for the man beside him, not quite low enough. Nora Pratt did not slow. She had Rosie pressed against her left side, and Rosie was awake and looking at the world with the wide, grave attention of a 4-month-old who had not yet learned that the world's attention was not always kind, and Nora kept her own eyes forward on the road that ran north from town toward the Aldrin property, 2 miles out. The stage driver had let her off at the edge of town. He would not take an unmarried woman with a baby to a man's property, he had said. She had looked at him, and she had looked at Rosie, and she had looked at the 2 miles of Kansas road in the May heat, and she had picked up her trunk and started walking. She had been walking for a long time. She knew how. If this woman already has your whole heart, subscribe to this channel right now and stay with me until the very end. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches tonight, because Nora Pratt has 2 miles of Kansas road ahead of her, and a cold kitchen at the end of it, and a ranch that is failing in ways nobody on it has yet understood, and she is about to change every one of those things. Don't go anywhere. Rosie had been born in January, which was not the worst time of year to be born, but was the worst time of year for a woman without a husband to have the fact of a baby become widely known in a town the size of Dunbar, where Nora had been living since her mother died, and where she had worked as a seamstress and had been, as far as the town was concerned, unremarkable and therefore untroubling until she wasn't. The father was a man named Gerald Pratt. She had taken his name when he asked her to, and given the name to the baby when Gerald did not stay long, enough to do it himself, riding out in November when the pregnancy became too real to ignore. She was not bitter about Gerald. In the specific sense that bitterness requires ongoing energy, she did not have. He was gone. Rosie was here. The arithmetic was simple. The arithmetic of Dunbar was less simple. A woman without a husband and with a baby was a particular kind of problem for a small town, not because anyone's life was affected by her situation, but because her situation existed and could be seen. She had absorbed 3 months of commentary from people who had appointed themselves its custodians, and then she had seen the advertisement in the Dunbar Courier, housekeeper and cook wanted, Aldrin Ranch, Hardin Creek, Kansas. Applicants should be capable of hard work and plain cooking. References not required. References not required. She had written the same day. Jesse Aldrin's response arrived in 9 days. Come when you're ready. The room off the kitchen is yours. No questions, no conditions. She packed what she owned and came. The Aldrin Ranch was what 2 miles of Kansas walking in May heat prepared you to expect from a man who had stopped requiring references. A property that had once been well managed and was currently losing the argument. The fences were adequate. The barn was sound. The house was the problem, not structurally, but in the way a house becomes a problem when no one has been keeping it worth keeping. Nora stood at the gate with Rosie on her hip and looked at it and decided she could work with it. She was still deciding when the front door opened and Jesse Aldrin came out. He was large and dark-haired and looked like a man who had recently stopped sleeping enough. He came down the porch steps and stopped at the gate and looked at her, and then he looked at Rosie, and something moved across his face that was too fast and too specific for Nora to read in full. A movement in the eyes, a momentary stillness, the particular quality of a man encountering something that lands somewhere tender before he has time to guard the approach. He looked at Rosie for 3 full seconds before he looked at Nora again. He did not look at her the way the town had looked at her. "Miss Pratt," he said, "Mr. Aldrin." She kept her chin level. She had decided on the road that she would not arrive apologizing, and she had kept to the decision, and she held it now. He looked at the trunk. He opened the gate and picked it up, one-handed, as though it weighed nothing, which it did not. It weighed a considerable amount, and he carried it to the house without making a point of it. He held the door. She went in. The kitchen was cold. Not from the season, it was May. The air outside was warm, but from the particular cold of a room that has not had a fire in it regularly, a settled, stale cold that lives in the walls and the floorboards and the ash in the firebox that no one has cleaned out since the last time someone cared. Nora stood in the kitchen doorway and surveyed it with the same look she gave all problems, direct, without flinching, calculating what was needed in what order. The firebox first, then the floor, then the pantry assessment, then the stove. Once the firebox was clear, she set Rosie in the basket she had carried inside, a wicker basket, lined stable, which she placed near enough to the stove to be warm once the stove was going, and far enough from it to be safe, in a position from which Rosie could see the room, which Rosie preferred, being a person who liked to know what was happening around her. Jesse had followed her to the kitchen doorway and was standing in it. She could feel him assessing what she was doing without being certain what she was doing or whether to help, which she recognized as the particular posture of a man who has been managing alone long enough that he has forgotten how to be in a kitchen with someone else in it. "The ranch hands eat at 6, he said. "How many?" "4, Corbin, Dell, the Yates brothers." She looked at the pantry. She opened it. The provisions were not what she would have chosen, but they were enough. Salt pork, dried beans, flour, cornmeal, a venison haunch hung in the cold room that would do for tonight. She looked at the stove, which had not been blacked in some time, and had a build-up on the firebox door she would address tomorrow. She found kindling in the box beside it, and she found the striker on the shelf above, and she opened the firebox, and she lit it. The flame caught. The stove ticked as it began to warm. Rosie, in the basket, made the small sound she made when something in her immediate environment changed, and Jesse in the doorway looked at Rosie again with that same unguarded quality he had shown at the gate, a look that Nora filed carefully and did not press. "I'll have something ready by 6, she said. He nodded. He went out. She turned to the stove and she began. The first meal was biscuits and venison stew, and she had it on the table at 6 with 7 minutes to spare. The hands came in from the yard. Corbin first, a lean man in his 30s who looked at Rosie's basket with an expression containing both dismissal and calculation. Then Dell older, who removed his hat at the door without being asked. Then the Yates brothers, Pete and Sam, 17 and 19, who stopped in the doorway when they smelled the stew and looked at each other with the expression of men who have found something they had stopped expecting. Jesse came last and sat at the head of the table, and Nora served without ceremony and sat at the far end, Rosie in the basket beside her chair, and the table went quiet in the specific way that tables go quiet when people are eating something worth eating. The biscuits were good. She knew this without needing anyone to say so, because she had made biscuits in enough kitchens to know the difference, and these were light and had a proper crust, and the ratio of fat to flour was what it should be. The stew was better. The venison had had time to cook down until it released everything it had. The broth gone dark and thick, smelling of the bay she had found in the back of the spice shelf, and the black pepper she had used without apology, because these men had been eating under-seasoned food for long enough, and a little black pepper was not going to inconvenience anyone. Pete Yates ate 3 portions. Sam Yates ate 2 and looked at the pot as though considering a third, and ultimately decided against it with the visible effort of a young man exercising restraint. Dell said quietly to his bowl, "Lord have mercy." Corbin said nothing, which was its own form of information. Jesse ate 2 bowls. He said nothing throughout the meal and nothing when it was over, but before he pushed back from the table, he looked down the length of it at Nora with the careful attention he had been giving her since the gate, and he gave a single nod, small, deliberate, the kind of nod that stands in for a longer statement in a man who does not make longer statements, and stood up and went out. Pete Yates, on his way through the door, paused beside Rosie's basket. He looked down at the baby with the helpless expression of a 17-year-old who has not yet developed any defenses against a 4-month-old looking back at him with complete and solemn attention. Rosie looked at him. Pete looked at Rosie. He put one careful finger near her hand, and she wrapped her own fingers around it with the decisive grip of a baby who has found something worth holding. He stood there for 30 seconds. "She's real strong," he said, to no one in particular, and went outside. Nora looked at the empty doorway and the table and the stove that was now warm and doing what it was built to do, and she thought, "This is manageable." She had managed worse. She would manage this. She cleared the table and she washed the dishes, and she put Rosie to bed in the room off the kitchen. That was hers, and she went to sleep with the window cracked against the May night and the sound of the ranch settling into the dark. By the end of the 2nd week, she knew the ranch the way she knew a kitchen, through its organization and its gaps, the things that ran as they should, and the things that were quietly failing. The east field had a drainage problem she had noticed from the kitchen window and mentioned to Jesse, who agreed it had been on his list since the previous fall. She understood from the state of everything else that his list was longer than his available hours, and she had begun quietly allocating her own observation to the items on it. The water trough in the south pasture had a leak, which she mentioned to Dell, who fixed it the following morning. The grain storage had a moisture problem along the east wall. She described it to Jesse with the dimensions and the smell that indicated early spoilage, and he had the wall resealed within 3 days. She noted these things and reported them without ceremony, because they were not achievements. They were observations. She simply had her eyes open. It was on the 17th day that she found the tally book. She had been looking for the second flour barrel, which Jesse had mentioned was kept in the back of the dry storage room, and she had found it and also found, on the shelf above it, a ledger she took for the household accounts until she opened it and found it was the cattle tally, head count by date going back 14 months, in a hand she did not recognize as Jesse's. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked out the dry storage window at the south pasture, where a portion of the herd was visible from this angle. She counted what she could see. She looked at the most recent tally entry. She put the book back exactly as she had found it. The following morning she was at the kitchen window before first light with a piece of paper and a pencil. She counted the cattle visible in the south half pasture and wrote down the number. She did this 3 mornings running, rotating her vantage between the window, the side yard, and one early walk to the east fence line before the household woke. When she had 3 counts, none of them matched the most recent tally entry. The average discrepancy was 19 head. 19 head. She looked at her numbers for a long time. Then she went and made breakfast. She did not go to Jesse immediately. She was a woman who had learned that an accusation required evidence before it was worth making, and she wanted 1 more week of counts before she was certain. She spent that week watching Corbin in the way she watched things she was uncertain about, not with obvious attention, but with the peripheral, patient notice of a woman who has learned that the direct look is not always the most useful one. On the 25th day, she went to Jesse. She brought her 4 pages of counts, and she put them on the kitchen table at the end of supper after the hands had gone, and she told him what she had found and what she had done to confirm it. She said all of it in the even, uninfluenced tone she used for facts, because it was a fact she was presenting. She had the foundation. She had built it carefully for exactly this moment. Jesse read her numbers twice. He looked at the tally book she had placed beside them, open to the most recent entry. He did not speak for a long time. What moved across his face was not surprise. She thought he had suspected something longer than he had allowed himself to act, but the particular expression of a man who has just had a fear confirmed and is reckoning with both the confirmation and the relief that it has finally arrived. "Corbin," he said. "I don't know for certain," she said. "I know the numbers are wrong." He nodded. He looked at her across the table with the 4 pages of her careful handwriting in front of him, and something settled in his face that she had not seen there before. "You should have told me sooner," he said. "I needed to be right first," she said. He looked at her for a moment, then simply, "Thank you." Corbin was gone from the property by noon the following day. He did not go quietly. There were words in the yard, the kind of words that carry, and Nora was at the kitchen window and heard the shape of the exchange without the detail. What she heard clearly was Jesse's voice, which did not rise but had a quality she had not heard in it before, the specific flat authority of a man who has decided something and is not interested in arguing about it. She did not hear Corbin's wagon leave, but she saw the dust from it on the south road 20 minutes later. What she had not anticipated was that Corbin would stop in Hardin Creek on his way out. She learned this the following Thursday from Dell, who came in for his noon meal with the tight-mouthed expression of a man carrying something he does not want to carry. He told her, sitting at the kitchen table while she put food in front of him, that Corbin had been in the Hardin Creek feed store talking, and that what he had been saying was that the woman at the Aldrin Ranch had been going through the account books in search of what she could take, which was the story of a dishonest man making the most of the exit available to him. Dell told her this and then ate his food and said, "I thought you ought to know." "Thank you," she said. She put his coffee refill in front of him, and she went back to the stove, and she stood there for a moment looking at it. The same stove, lit on arrival, kept burning since. Jesse was at the feed store in town that afternoon when she sent Pete for him, and he heard what was being said before Pete found him. He heard it from the feed store owner, and from the man at the counter, and from the woman who had come in for soda crackers and stayed to participate in the general conversation about the Aldrin Ranch's cook, her baby, her body, and her apparent interest in account books above her station. He stood in the Hardin Creek feed store, and he listened to all of it. Then he reached into his coat, and he took out the tally book, and he put it on the counter, open to the page where the discrepancy was visible between Corbin's last entry and the dates after his departure. "This is the Aldrin tally book," he said. He said it to the room in the carrying voice of a man who intends to be heard by everyone present and does not need to raise it to accomplish this. Corbin Dale was skimming cattle off this ranch for 14 months. I know this because Nora Pratt counted my herd for 4 weeks before she came to me with the numbers. He looked at each face in the room with the unhurried patience of a man who has something to say and will finish saying it. She counted them before first light 3 times over because she knew an accusation needed proof before it was worth making. He closed the book. "She saved this ranch. Anyone who has something to say about Nora Pratt can say it to me." Nobody said anything. The feed store owner looked at the tally book. The woman with the soda crackers looked at the floor. The man at the counter found something on the wall that required his attention. Jesse Aldrin put the tally book back in his coat and walked out. He was at the kitchen door when he got back, hat in hand, the evening light behind him. Nora had Rosie on her hip and was stirring the beans with her free hand, which was how she managed most things, with what was available, without complaint about the arrangement. She looked at him. "It's handled," he said. She looked at his face to see if that was all, and decided it was not, and waited. He turned his hat once in his hands. "I should have seen the tally problem myself," he said. "It had been sitting there, and he stopped. I was managing too many things alone, and I stopped seeing them clearly." "You see them clearly now," she said, "because of you." She looked at him for a moment. She had learned to read Jesse Aldrin across 7 weeks, and she knew what it cost him to say a thing directly, and she received this one in the register it deserved. "The Eastfield drainage still needs addressing before summer," she said. "Dell says he can do it if you free him from the south fence work for 3 days. The corner of his mouth moved. "All right. And the grain store east wall needs checking again after the rain last week." "I'll look at it tomorrow." Rosie reached out toward Jesse from Nora's hip, the decisive, unambiguous reach of a baby who has identified a face she recognizes and wants to be closer to it. Jesse looked at Rosie's reaching hand with the particular expression Nora had been watching since the gate, the one that was too specific and too fast for her to have read completely, and this time she was close enough and had known him long enough that she could read it. It was not grief. It was not pity. It was the face of a man who has been looking at something for 7 weeks and has finally allowed himself to know what he is looking at. He took Rosie's hand, gently with 2 fingers, the way a large man takes a small hand when he is being careful not to be the size he is. Rosie considered his hand with the grave attention she gave everything, and then tightened her grip, and Jesse Aldrin looked at this 4-month-old child holding his finger, and his face did a thing that Nora had not seen it do in 7 weeks of close observation. It opened. "She has your hands," he said. "Long fingers," Nora said. "My grandmother." He looked at Nora over Rosie's head, not with the careful attention he had given her since arrival, the assessing, grateful, respectful regard of an employer who had discovered more than he bargained for in a hire, with something else, something he had been building toward across 7 weeks of mornings and meals, and the quiet daily evidence of a woman doing the work that needed doing without asking to be seen doing it. "Nora," he said. She waited. "I'd like to ask you something when you're ready to hear it." She looked at him, at the hat in his free hand and Rosie's grip on the fingers of his other, and the evening light behind him, Kansas going gold, the whole of the summer still ahead. "I'm listening now," she said. She intended that. She had been listening since the gate. He asked. The stove behind her was warm and burning clean, the way she had kept it for 7 weeks, and Rosie was still holding his hand, and outside the east field was draining properly now, and the grain store wall was sealed, and the cattle tallied honest, and the ranch was standing, fully standing in the dry Kansas spring that was not going to break the Aldrin operation after all. She had lit the stove. It had been enough to begin everything. They were married before the summer ended, a late July wedding, the church in Hardin Creek holding more people than expected, which suggested that Jesse Aldrin's accounting in the feed store had landed more completely than Corbin's version. Dell stood as witness. Pete Yates was present in the second pew and spent a portion of the ceremony holding Rosie, who had by then formed with Pete a bond of particular gravity that neither of them could have explained but both understood. The East Field drained well that summer and the summer after it. The tally ran honest. The stove in the Aldrin kitchen was never cold in the morning again, not from that May forward. The ash cleared out, and the firebox blacked and the wood stacked fresh each night, because Nora Pratt had arrived at a cold kitchen and understood instinctively that this was the center of the house, and the center of the house should not be cold. The people of Hardin Creek adjusted, in the way that people adjust when the story they told turned out to be the wrong one, and the right one is standing in front of them, insisting on being acknowledged. Some adjusted faster than others. Some did not adjust fully. Nora did not require full adjustment. She required only accuracy. The same standard she to tally books, grain assessments, biscuit ratios, and the people who had something to say about her life without having taken the trouble to understand it. Rosie grew up on the Aldrin Ranch knowing it was hers, every fence line and drainage ditch and grain store and cattle count of it. And she had her great-grandmother's long fingers, and her mother's way of looking at problems directly, and her stepfather's patience with things that took time to become what they were going to be, which is the combination of qualities you need if you intend to run a ranch honestly in the dry grasslands of Kansas, and she had all three from the people who had earned them first. Nora Pratt Aldrin never apologized for her daughter. She never apologized for herself. She had arrived with a baby on her hip and her trunk on her back, and 2 miles of road still in front of her, and she had walked the road and lit the stove and done what she could see needed doing, and the rest of it had followed from that, the way most true things follow from the first honest act. Not quickly, not without difficulty, but with the particular permanence of something built right. She had known how to build right for as long as she could remember. She had simply, finally found the place worth building.